The Karangal Valley swallowed convoys the way the ocean swallowed stones. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Blackwood knew this, had studied every after-action report from the past 3 years, and still she watched her 47 vehicles snake into the narrow pass at 0340 hours because the mission required it and Marines did not get to choose their ground. She rode in Vehicle 12, tablet glowing against her face as she reviewed the manifest one final time. 540 Marines. Enough ammunition and supplies to sustain Firebase Phoenix for another month. Routine rotation, they called it. Nothing in the Karangal had been routine since 2005. Now, wherever you are watching this, whether you are in Texas or California or somewhere overseas, you probably know someone who has served in places like this valley. Drop your state or country in the comments because this story happened to real people in a real place, and it matters that we remember. The lead vehicle crossed the kilometer marker Blackwood had flagged in her mission brief. Narrow point. Limited maneuver space. She keyed her radio to remind the convoy commander about speed discipline, and the world turned white. The explosion lifted the first MRAP 3 feet off the ground and split it open like an aluminum can. Before the debris finished falling, the ridgelines erupted. RPG trails streaked down from 3 directions simultaneously, and Blackwood understood in that single frozen moment that they had been expected. This was not an opportunistic ambush. This was coordinated annihilation. She grabbed her radio as rounds began punching through the convoy. Bastard 6 to all elements, contact front and flanks, IED main, disperse and establish defensive positions, acknowledged by section. The responses came fragmented, shouted over gunfire and screaming metal. Her driver slammed the vehicle into reverse, trying to find cover that did not exist. The rear of the convoy attempted to withdraw. The second IED detonated under Vehicle 44, transforming the MRAP into a fireball that blocked the only exit. Blackwood processed the tactical picture with the cold clarity that 8 combat deployments had carved into her brain. They were boxed into a 200-meter kill zone with elevated enemies on 3 sides and no route of escape. She bailed from her vehicle as an RPG turned it into scrap metal, rolling into a drainage ditch as shrapnel sang overhead. Around her, Marines were doing what Marines did. They were fighting back. M4S barked from every position, saw gunners laying suppressive fire toward the muzzle flashes above, but the geometry was wrong. The enemy held the high ground, and they had planned this perfectly. The first casualty report reached her 6 minutes into the engagement. 11 dead, 23 wounded from the initial salvos alone. Blackwood absorbed the numbers and kept moving, crawling toward a rock formation where her communications sergeant had established a hasty command post. The radio was her lifeline now. Everything depended on what came through that handset. She keyed the emergency frequency. Bastard 6 to Falcon Main, troops in contact, grid follows, requesting immediate close air support and emergency extraction. We have mass casualties and are fixed in a kill zone. How copy? The response came through static and chaos. Falcon Main copies Bastard 6, Apache flight launching now. 40 minutes to station, extraction assets being mobilized. Hold your position. 40 minutes. Blackwood looked at her watch, then at the ridgelines, still spitting fire. She did the math that every infantry officer dreads. Casualty rate against time. Ammunition expenditure against resupply probability. Enemy reinforcement indicators against friendly response windows. The math said 40 minutes might as well be 40 years. Sergeant Major Derek Torres materialized beside her, blood running from a gash above his eye, but his voice steady as bedrock. Ma'am, I have accountability on most of the battalion. We are at 60% defensive positions established. Ammunition situation is critical on the eastern sector, and I am seeing more movement on the North Ridge. Torres had been her senior enlisted advisor for 2 years. He did not sugarcoat and he did not panic. If he said critical, he meant they would be throwing rocks within 3 hours. She grabbed his arm. Give me a consolidated casualty count and ammunition status from every section. I need HAR numbers in 10 minutes. He nodded and disappeared into the smoke. The enemy probed the eastern perimeter while Torres was gone. 20 fighters rushing down the slope, screaming, firing from the hip. The Marines cut them down at 50 meters, but the probe revealed what Blackwood already knew. The enemy was testing them, finding weak points, preparing for the real assault. This was professional. This was patient. This was terrifying. Torres returned with numbers that confirmed her fears. 34 dead, 67 wounded, 8 of them critical bleeds who would die without surgical intervention within hours. Ammunition distribution showed the eastern sector down to magazines in single digits. She did the math again. Different variables this time. Time until Apaches arrived. Time until extraction. Time until her Marines simply ran out of bullets and became targets rather than fighters. The answer had not changed. They would not survive until extraction. Torres must have seen it in her face. What do we do, ma'am? Blackwood looked at the 500 Marines still fighting, still holding, still believing that help would come, because that was what they had been promised. She thought about her daughter, 8 years old, who had asked when Mommy was coming home. We make them pay for every inch, she said, and we pray someone up there has the guts to come get us. The eastern perimeter erupted with the sound of a major assault beginning. Torres sprinted toward the gunfire without another word, and Blackwood followed him into the chaos, knowing that prayer might be all they had left. Captain Maya Chun was reviewing maintenance logs in the ready room when the alert klaxon shattered the pre-dawn silence. She was on her feet before the sound finished its first cycle, muscle memory from 8 years of flying heavy-lift helicopters sending her toward the door while her mind caught up to what the alarm meant. Mass casualty event. Emergency extraction. Someone was in trouble. The briefing took 90 seconds. 2nd Battalion, 540 Marines, ambushed in the Karengal Valley. Multiple casualties, enemy force in the hundreds, extraction assets needed immediately. Maya was assigned lead bird, her CH-53 Super Stallion designated primary extraction platform. She grabbed her flight gear and ran for the flight line. Chief Warrant Officer Linda Park met her at the aircraft, already halfway through the pre-flight checklist. Park had been her co-pilot for 3 years, a Korean-American woman from Seattle who spoke softly and flew with surgical precision. They worked in silent coordination, hands moving through the familiar sequences while radio traffic painted an increasingly desperate picture from the valley. The Apache flight launched first, Captain James Harrington leading 2 gunships toward the fight. He passed Maya on the taxiway, sliding his visor up to flash her a grin through the cockpit glass. His voice crackled over the ground frequency. "Hey Chun, let the real pilots handle the combat stuff. You just wait for the taxi run when we have cleared the bad guys out." Maya did not respond. Harrington was an excellent attack pilot and an insufferable human being. Both facts were irrelevant to the mission. She finished the pre-flight and strapped into the left seat while Park completed the engine start sequence. The twin turbines spooled up with their familiar whine, rotor blades beginning their lazy rotation overhead. Maya keyed the tower frequency. Falcon Tower, Valkyrie 1-1, request departure clearance for emergency extraction mission, Karengal Valley. The response took too long. Valkyrie 1-1, hold position. Stand by. Maya exchanged a glance with Park. Hold position was not a phrase that belonged in emergency extraction protocols. She waited 30 seconds, then keyed the radio again. Tower, Valkyrie 1-1, requesting immediate clearance. We have Marines dying out there. The tower controller's voice sounded strained. Valkyrie 1-1, shut down engines and report to the command building immediately. Colonel Vance's orders. The words did not make sense. Maya sat frozen for a moment, certain she had misheard. Park's hand found her arm, squeezed once. They both understood that something had gone very wrong, and it had nothing to do with the ambush in the valley. Maya killed the engines and walked to the command building with ice forming in her stomach. Colonel Richard Vance stood at the head of the briefing room, a dozen pilots arranged before him in various states of confusion and anger. Vance was a careful man, a bureaucrat in flight suits who had risen through staff positions rather than cockpit hours. He measured success in metrics and acceptable loss ratios. Maya had never trusted him. He waited until she took her seat, then activated the screen behind him. Intelligence update received 20 minutes ago. Enemy forces in the Korengal have acquired at least 4 Stinger missiles. Confirmation came from signals intercept and visual identification by Harrington's flight. He clicked to the next slide, showing the distinctive silhouette of the shoulder-fired weapon. As of this moment, the Korengal Valley is designated no-fly for all transport aircraft until fixed-wing assets can neutralize the missile threat. A pilot in the front row raised his hand. "Sir, what is the timeline on those assets?" Vance's expression did not change. 18 hours minimum. We are coordinating with Carrier Strike Group for F-18 support, but weather over the carrier and current sortie commitments mean we cannot expect effective suppression before tomorrow morning. Maya felt the ice in her stomach turn to fire. She stood without being recognized. "Colonel, 540 Marines are trapped in that valley. They have mass casualties, and they are running out of ammunition. They cannot survive 18 hours. Vance turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her sick. He had already done the math. He had already made his decision. "Captain Chun, our risk assessment indicates that transport aircraft entering that airspace face greater than 50% probability of catastrophic loss. I will not send helicopters and crews into a kill zone to be shot down by missiles we know are waiting for them. So we just leave them there." Maya heard her own voice as if from a distance, flat and hard. "We prosecute the threat with appropriate assets and extract survivors when conditions permit." Vance clasped his hands behind his back. "That is the decision, Captain. Your aircraft is the primary extraction platform for this region. It is too valuable to risk. You are grounded until further notice and confined to the ready room." He paused, meeting her eyes. "Is that understood?" The room was silent. Every pilot present knew what those words meant. They were being ordered to let 540 Marines die because the math said saving them cost too much. Maya held Vance's gaze for a long moment. Then she turned and walked out of the briefing room without answering his question. Park was waiting outside. She fell into step beside Maya without a word, and together they walked back toward the ready room where they had been ordered to sit and wait while the radio filled with the sounds of men dying in a valley 18 hours away. For hours into the siege, Sergeant Major Dare Torres had stopped counting the dead and started counting the living. It was easier math, and it kept him moving through the Marine positions instead of curling up behind a rock to wait for the end. He carried a sack of magazines scavenged from destroyed vehicles, distributing ammunition to fighting positions like some grim Santa Claus visiting children who might not see another Christmas. The enemy attacked in waves every 20 minutes. Not full assaults, just probing actions. 20 fighters here, 30 there, testing the perimeter for soft spots. Each probe cost the Marines ammunition they could not replace and revealed defensive positions the enemy would remember. Torres recognized the pattern from his first deployment 15 years ago. The enemy commander was patient. He was building a picture of their defenses, identifying weaknesses, preparing something decisive. When the real assault came, it would come at exactly the right place. He found Corpsman's second-class Williams at the casualty collection point, a shallow depression behind a burned-out truck where the wounded lay in rows. Williams looked up with eyes that had seen too much in too few hours. His report came in fragments. 34 confirmed dead, 67 wounded, 8 critical cases who needed surgical intervention within hours or they would join the confirmed count. Torres asked about morphine supplies, and Williams just shook his head. The sergeant major moved on because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant despair. Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood had established her command post in a crater that offered marginal cover from 3 directions. She crouched over a radio that had become her entire world, calling for support that kept not coming. Torres approached and knelt beside her, waiting for her to finish the transmission. "Falcon Main, Bastard 6, I say again, we need extraction now. We have critical wounded who will not survive until morning." What is the status of our birds? The response crackled through static. Bastard 6 extraction assets are grounded due to threat conditions. Apache support is Winchester on ammunition and returning to base. Fast movers are 18 hours out. Advise you consolidate defensive positions and prepare to hold through the night. Blackwood closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, the despair Torres expected was not there. Only cold calculation. She acknowledged the transmission and turned to face him. What is our ammunition status? Eastern sector is critical. Western and Southern have maybe 2 hours of sustained contact. Torres paused. The men are asking questions I cannot answer, ma'am. She nodded. They know. A young Marine appeared at the edge of the crater, barely visible in the dust and smoke. Private First Class Martinez, 19 years old, from somewhere in New Mexico. Torres had met his mother at a family day 6 months ago. She had made him promise to look after her boy. Martinez's voice cracked when he spoke. Sergeant Major, are they coming for us? Torres looked at the kid's face, saw the fear underneath the determination, and did what senior enlisted had done for young Marines since the halls of Montezuma. He lied. Help is coming, Marine. Apaches are working the ridge lines, and extraction birds are spinning up right now. You just hold your sector and stay ready to move when I give the word. Martinez nodded, relief flooding his features. He disappeared back toward his fighting position, and Torres felt something break inside his chest that would never quite heal. Blackwood waited until the private was gone. She pulled Torres closer, voice dropping. I have done the math, Sergeant Major. She traced figures in the dirt. Current casualty rate against time. Ammunition expenditure against resupply probability. Enemy reinforcement pattern against our defensive capability. Torres watched her finger move through the calculations. What does it say? 6 hours. Maybe 7 if the enemy makes mistakes. Our position becomes untenable sometime around noon. She wiped the figures away. Extraction window opens in 18 hours. The gap between those two numbers is where we all die. Torres had known the truth before she said it. Hearing it spoken aloud simply made it real. He asked the only question that mattered. What do we do? Blackwood stood, looking out at the Marines fighting and dying across the valley floor. We make them pay for every inch, she said, and we pray someone up there has the guts to come get us before the math runs out. The eastern perimeter exploded with concentrated gunfire before Torres could respond. Not a probe this time. The sound was different, heavier, sustained in a way that meant the enemy had committed significant forces. This was the assault they had been preparing for. Torres grabbed his rifle and sprinted toward the sound of the guns. Behind him, Blackwood was already on the radio, calling for fires they did not have onto positions they could not hold. The valley had become a grave, and the only question left was how many Marines would fill it before someone found the courage to dig them out. The ready room had become a tomb for the living. Maya Chun sat in a cracked leather chair, flight helmet in her lap, listening to the radio traffic that command had not thought to disable. Every transmission from the valley cut through her like shrapnel. Casualty updates, ammunition requests. Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood's voice growing hoarser with each call for support that would not come. Maya had flown combat extractions for 6 years. She knew what dying sounded like over a radio frequency. The door opened, and Park slipped inside, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. She set one beside Maya and took the adjacent chair without speaking. They listened together as a young Marine's voice reported the eastern perimeter under heavy assault, requesting reinforcement from units that had no reinforcements to give. Park broke the silence first. What are you thinking about? Maya turned the helmet over in her hands, running her fingers across the worn paint where she had written her call sign years ago. I am thinking about my father's boat. Park waited. She knew the story existed, but had never heard it told. My parents fled Vietnam in 1979. Maya's voice was distant, reaching back across decades to a memory that was not her own, but had shaped everything she became. 30 people on a fishing boat designed for 8. No navigation equipment. No guarantee that anyone would find them before the sea did. They drifted for 11 days. She paused, listening to another transmission from the valley. More casualties. More desperation. An American Navy destroyer spotted them on day 12. The captain had orders not to stop for refugees. Picking up boat people would delay his mission, require resources, create paperwork that nobody wanted to file. His standing orders said to radio their position to the Coast Guard and continue on course. Park asked the question Maya needed her to ask. What did he do? He stopped. Maya looked at her co-pilot. He launched his boats and pulled all 30 people out of the water. My mother was pregnant with me. She delivered 3 weeks later at a refugee camp in the Philippines. That Navy captain broke his orders and gave me my entire life. The radio crackled with Blackwood's voice calling for extraction that Vance had forbidden. Maya set her helmet aside. Park understood immediately. You're going to take the bird. Maya nodded. Park was quiet for a long moment. She had a husband at Camp Pendleton, 2 children, ages 6 and 4, who made crayon drawings of helicopters for their mother. She had everything to lose and nothing to gain from what Maya was planning. You cannot fly that aircraft alone, Park said finally. And I did not become a pilot to sit in a room while Marines die because some colonel is afraid of his own shadow. Maya started to argue, to give Park the out she deserved, but the ready room door opened again before she could speak. Specialist Ahmed Farouk stepped inside and closed the door quickly behind him. He was the night shift radio operator, a second-generation Egyptian-American with a security clearance and a reputation for hearing things he should not hear. His eyes moved between Maya and Park, calculating something. I know what you're planning, he said, and I can help. Maya's hand moved instinctively toward the sidearm she was not wearing. How do you know anything? Farouk pulled a folded paper from his pocket. I have been monitoring tactical frequencies since the ambush started. The Stinger's Colonel Vance is so worried about a reel, but they have limitations. He spread the paper on the table between them. It showed a rough map of the valley with annotations in precise handwriting. The enemy has positioned their missile teams on these 3 ridge lines to cover the standard approach vectors. But there is a gap. His finger traced a route through terrain that looked impassable. The northeast approach through this series of canyons. Terrain masks the approach until you are inside the valley. The missile teams cannot depress their weapons far enough to engage an aircraft below the ridgeline. You would have approximately 90 seconds of exposure before reaching the landing zone. Maya studied the map. The route was insane. Flying a Super Stallion through mountain canyons at night. Terrain following at minimum altitude, threading between rocks that would kill them just as dead as any missile. It was exactly the kind of flying she had trained for and never been allowed to do. She looked up at Farouk. Why are you helping us? You will face court-martial right beside us if this goes wrong. Farouk's expression did not change, but something shifted behind his eyes. My brother is with 2nd Battalion. Lance Corporal Yusuf Farouk. He was in Vehicle 31 when the ambush started. The last transmission I intercepted listed him as wounded but alive. He paused. I cannot fly a helicopter, Captain, but I can make sure you know where to point it. Maya folded the map and slipped it into her flight suit. She looked at Park, then at Farouk. 2 people willing to risk everything, because leaving those Marines to die was not something they could live with. She picked up her helmet and headed for the door. Park followed. Farouk stayed behind to monitor frequencies and feed them updates through a channel Vance would not think to check. The flight line was dark and quiet. Most of the maintenance crews rotated today's shift. Maya walked toward her aircraft with Park beside her, and with every step, she felt the weight of what she was about to do settle onto her shoulders. Court-martial, prison, discharge, the end of everything she had built. She thought about her father's boat, about 30 people drifting in the darkness, hoping someone would break the rules to save them. Then she climbed into the cockpit and began her pre-flight checks. The Super Stallion sat on pad 7 like a sleeping giant, rotors drooping in the darkness. Maya approached with Park at her shoulder, boots crunching on gravel that sounded impossibly loud in the silent night. A single maintenance technician stood near the tail boom, clipboard in hand, running through post-inspection checks. He looked up as they approached, confusion flickering across his face. Captain Chun, I did not see any flight authorization come through for tonight. Maya kept her voice steady. Colonel Vance cleared an emergency maintenance check flight. Radio silence protocol. He does not want any chatter on the tower frequency. Just stay off comms and log it as routine when we return. The technician hesitated. Something in his expression said he knew the story did not quite fit, that maintenance flights did not happen at this hour with full combat loadouts. But he was a specialist, and she was a captain, and the military ran on the assumption that officers did not lie about orders. He stepped back from the aircraft. "Yes, ma'am. Safe flight." Maya climbed into the left seat while Park took the right. They moved through the abbreviated pre-flight with practiced efficiency, hands dancing across switches and gauges in a choreography they had performed hundreds of times. Maya unfolded Farouk's map and wedged it beside her knee, tracing the approach route one more time. The canyon system looked even more impossible in the dim cockpit lighting. One mistake, one miscalculation of rotor clearance, and they would become a debris field on a mountainside. Park finished her checks and looked over. Engine start. Maya engaged the auxiliary power unit and listened to the turbines begin their slow wind toward operating temperature. The sound was distinctive, unmistakable to anyone who had spent time on a flight line. They had perhaps 3 minutes before someone in the tower noticed an unauthorized startup. The radio crackled before the rotors reached full speed. Pad 7, this is Falcon Tower. We're showing unscheduled engine start on your aircraft. Identify and state intentions. Maya did not respond. She watched the engine gauges climb toward the green and willed them to move faster. Pad 7, Falcon Tower, respond immediately. You are not cleared for engine start. Shut down and identify. Park's hand hovered over the radio switch. Maya shook her head. The rotors were spinning now, building toward flight speed. 30 seconds. The tower controller's voice shifted from confused to alarmed. Security, Falcon Tower, we have an unauthorized aircraft startup on Pad 7. Dispatch immediately. Headlights flared to life across the base. 2 vehicles, then 3, converging on the flight line. Maya pulled collective and felt the aircraft lighten on its wheels. The Super Stallion wanted to fly. She was about to let it. In a command building, Colonel Richard Vance stood before the tactical display with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hand. He had been reviewing the timeline for the fixed-wing support, calculating how many Marines might reasonably survive until morning when his operations officer burst through the door. "Sir, someone is stealing a helicopter." Vance set down the coffee. "What?" "Pad 7, the primary extraction bird. Engine start 2 minutes ago. Not responding to tower." The officer checked his tablet. Registration shows as Captain Chen's aircraft. The color drained from Vance's face. He crossed the radio console in 3 strides and grabbed the handset. "Captain Chen, this is Colonel Vance. You are ordered to shut down your aircraft and return to the ready room immediately. Acknowledge." The Super Stallion lifted off as the security vehicles reached the pad's edge. Maya banked hard left, dropping the nose and accelerating into the darkness beyond the perimeter lights. She heard Vance's voice in her headset, heard the fury and the desperation underneath his command voice. "Captain Shun, you are in direct violation of orders. Land that aircraft immediately, or you will face general court-martial. Your career is over. Acknowledge this transmission." Maya leveled the aircraft at 50 feet, skimming the terrain with her navigation lights extinguished. The mountains rose ahead of her, black shapes against a marginally lighter sky. She keyed the radio one final time. "Negative, Colonel. I have 540 Marines to pick up." She killed the radio and the transponder simultaneously. On the tactical display in the command center, her aircraft's icon flickered and disappeared. Vance stared at the empty space on the screen where a $30 million helicopter had been, where a pilot he had specifically grounded was now flying toward a valley full of missiles and death. His operations officer waited for orders. Vance's mind raced through options, none of them good. He could scramble the Apaches to intercept, but Harrington's flight was still rearming from their earlier sortie. He could alert the enemy positions through intelligence channels, but that would mean admitting he had lost control of his own base. He could do nothing and pray that Chun died in a missile strike before she made him look any worse. "Give me CENTCOM," he said finally, "and find out how long until Harrington can launch." The operations officer reached for the phone, and Vance turned back to the empty display, watching the darkness where Captain Maya Chun had vanished with his career and possibly the lives of 540 Marines balanced on her rotors. The world turned green through Maya's night vision goggles, a luminous landscape of rocks and ridgelines rushing past at 140 knots. She flew 50 feet above the terrain, close enough to count individual boulders, close enough that a single twitch of the cyclic would turn her aircraft into a fireball. Park called out obstacles in a steady stream. "Power lines 200 meters, come right. Ridge rising, pull up 15 feet. Canyon mouth ahead, narrow entry." Maya threaded the Super Stallion into the canyon system that did not exist on any standard navigation chart. Farouk's intelligence had been precise. The passage was barely wide enough for her rotor arc, walls of stone sliding past on either side like the throat of some ancient beast swallowing them whole. She felt the aircraft shudder as rotor wash bounced off the canyon walls and came back at them in confused vortices. Every instinct screamed to climb, to find open air, to fly like a sane person. She held her altitude and pushed deeper into the mountains. Park monitored the threat receiver, watching for the telltale spike that would mean a stinger had found them. The screen stayed clear. The terrain was doing its job, masking their signature from the missile teams on the ridgelines above. They were invisible as long as they stayed low, stayed inside the rock, stayed committed to a flight path that left no room for error. The canyon twisted left, and Maya followed it, banking the aircraft hard enough to feel the forces press her into the seat. A rock outcropping flashed past her window, close enough to touch. Park's breath caught, but she did not stop calling obstacles. Her voice was the only thing keeping them alive. 8 minutes into the canyon, the passage widened slightly. Maya allowed herself a single breath of relief before Park's voice cut through. Aircraft 11 o'clock high. 2 contacts descending. Maya's hand moved to the flare dispenser before her brain caught up. If those were enemy aircraft, they were already dead. But the radar signature was wrong, too small for fixed wing, moving with the distinctive profile of attack helicopters. The radio crackled with a familiar voice. "Chun, what the hell are you doing out here?" Harrington. His Apache flight must have been rearming when she launched, now back in the air and vectored toward her position. Vance would have sent them to intercept, to force her down, or watch her die trying. Maya keyed the radio. "Rooster, I am executing extraction of 540 Marines from the Karengal Valley. You can cover me, or you can stay clear, but I am not turning around." Static filled the frequency. Maya could imagine the conversation happening in Harrington's cockpit, the calculation of risk versus duty versus whatever passed for conscience in a man who measured his worth in enemy kills. She had never liked him. She had also never doubted his skills or his courage. His wingman's voice cut through first. "Lead, Falcon 6 is ordering us to intercept and force her to return to base. Direct orders." More static. Then Harrington's voice, harder than Maya had ever heard it. "I'm having radio difficulties. 3. Say again your last transmission." I did not copy any orders. His wingman understood. "Understood, lead. Radio difficulties confirmed. What are your intentions?" "Flight, come to heading 270. We are providing escort for extraction aircraft." Harrington paused. "Chun, you are certifiably insane. Also, that is the best flying I have ever seen. Try not to kill yourself before I can buy you a drink." Maya allowed herself the ghost of a smile. "Just keep them off me, Rooster." The Apaches climbed to overwatch positions as Maya pushed through the final kilometers of canyon. Park counted down to the gap, the 90-second window where they would have to climb above the terrain masking and expose themselves to missile fire. Farouk's intelligence said the window was clean. Intelligence was sometimes wrong. Gap in 60 seconds. Park's voice was steady. 40 seconds. 20. Window opening now. Maya pulled back on the cyclic and felt the Super Stallion rise from the canyon's embrace. The threat receiver screamed once, a brief spike of radar energy painting them, then fell silent. No look, no missile. They were through. The valley opened beneath them like a wound in the earth. Tracer fire stitched the darkness in crisscrossing patterns, muzzle flashes winking from the ridgelines and the valley floor alike. The battle was still raging, which meant Marines were still fighting, which meant Marines were still alive to save. Maya pushed the nose down and descended toward the chaos below. Behind her, Harrington's Apaches peeled off to engage enemy positions on the eastern ridge, their cannons hammering out a rhythm of suppressive fire that would buy her the seconds she needed to land. Park switched to the ground frequency. Bastard 6, this is Valkyrie 1-1. Inbound your position for emergency extraction. Mark your LZ with IR and advise enemy positions. The response came through static and gunfire, a woman's voice raw with exhaustion and something that might have been hope. Valkyrie 1-1, Bastard 6, LZ is hot. Repeat, LZ is extremely hot. We have enemy at the wire on 3 sides, but God help me, you're the most beautiful thing I have ever heard. IR marking now. A pinprick of infrared light blossomed on Maya's goggles, marking the landing zone in the center of hell. She adjusted her approach vector and began her descent, watching the tracers reach up toward her like fingers trying to drag her down into the fire. Behind her, Park was already calculating load capacity. 55 Marines per lift. 10 trips to get everyone out. They had maybe 3 hours until dawn made the canyon approach suicidal. The math did not work. Maya was going to make it work anyway. 8 hours into the siege, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Blackwood had stopped believing in rescue. She crouched in a crater that had once been her command post, surrounded by the wreckage of vehicles that had once been her convoy, commanding Marines who had once numbered 540 and now numbered something less. The exact count changed every few minutes as the corpsmen updated their tally of the dead. 89 confirmed killed, 156 wounded, 31 of them critical cases who had already outlived every medical prediction. Ammunition had passed critical 2 hours ago and now existed in a category that had no official designation. Marines were scavenging rounds from the dead, pulling magazines from bodies that no longer needed them to feed rifles that could not stop firing. The eastern perimeter had been breached twice in the last hour. Both times, the Marines had sealed the gap with bayonets and rifle butts in bare hands, fighting in the darkness like their grandfathers had fought on frozen hills in Korea. The enemy had learned to respect the perimeter, but respect only delayed the inevitable. They were massing now, hundreds of fighters visible on the thermal scopes, preparing for the assault that would finally overwhelm what remained of 2nd Battalion. Sergeant Major Torres materialized from the smoke and dropped into the crater beside her. His face was black with soot and someone else's blood, but his voice carried the same steady cadence it always had. Ma'am, I have eyes on enemy staging areas north and east. Conservative estimate puts them at 400-plus fighters. They have been probing all night, and now they are done probing. I give us 30 minutes before they come for real. Blackwood absorbed the information without visible reaction. 30 minutes. She had hoped for an hour, had prayed for 2. 30 minutes was not enough time for anything except dying. She reached for the radio and keyed the frequency she had hoped never to use. Any station, this is Bastard 6 declaring Broken Arrow. I say again, Broken Arrow. We are about to be overrun and request immediate close air support. Danger, close on my position. All aircraft are cleared hot on coordinates to follow. Broken Arrow. The words meant that American forces were about to be destroyed, that the situation was so desperate that commanders on the ground were willing to call fire on their own positions to take the enemy with them. It was the last call a commander ever made, the admission that survival was no longer the objective. The response came from somewhere far away, a calm voice in a climate-controlled operations center who had never smelled cordite or held a dying Marine. Bastard 6, CENTCOM copies Broken Arrow. Fast movers are being diverted to your position. Estimated time on station 40 minutes. Acknowledge. Blackwood wanted to laugh. She wanted to scream. 40 minutes. The same timeline they'd been given 8 hours ago. The same promise that kept receding like a mirage in the desert. She acknowledged the transmission and killed the radio. Torres waited for orders. Blackwood looked at the Marines around her, kids and veterans alike, all of them exhausted and wounded and still fighting because that was what Marines did. She gathered the surviving officers with a gesture, 5 lieutenants and a captain who had started the day commanding platoons and now commanded whatever fragments remained. Final defensive positions. Her voice cut through the gunfire. Concentrate all remaining ammunition in the center. Fixe bayonets. We hold until we cannot hold anymore, and then we make them pay for every inch they take. No one surrenders. No one runs. We are Marines, and this is where we stand. The officers nodded and dispersed to their positions. Torres stayed beside her, checking his rifle, counting the rounds in his final magazine. 14 bullets between him and whatever came next. Then he heard it. A sound beneath the gunfire, beneath the explosions, beneath the screaming of men trying to kill each other in the darkness. Rotors. Heavy rotors. The deep thump of a big aircraft moving fast and low. Everyone had heard the Apaches earlier, the sharp crack of their blades as they made gun runs on the ridgelines. This was different. This was heavier, slower, the unmistakable signature of a CH-53 Super Stallion. A young corporal shouted from the perimeter, "That is a 53. Someone is actually coming." Blackwood grabbed the radio, her hands shaking for the first time all night. "Unidentified aircraft, this is Bastard 6, LZ is hot. Say again, LZ is extremely hot. We have enemy at the wire on 3 sides. Advise you abort approach." The voice that came back was female, calm, utterly certain. "Bastard 6, this is Valkyrie. I have room for your wounded. Mark the LZ with IR strobe." Blackwood stared at the radio as if it had spoken in tongues. She looked at Torres and saw the same confusion on his face. Someone had come. Against all odds, against all orders, against everything Vance had said about risk assessment and acceptable losses. Someone had come. Torres was already moving, pulling the IR strobe from his vest and sprinting toward the only flat ground in the entire perimeter. He activated the beacon and held it over his head, painting a target in the darkness that only friendly aircraft could see. The Super Stallion descended through the tracer fire like an angel falling from heaven, rotors churning the smoke and dust into a whirlwind that obscured everything except the navigation lights that should not have been visible at all. Blackwood watched it come and felt something she had forgotten existed. Sergeant Major Torres had seen helicopters land in combat zones dozens of times across 4 deployments. He had never seen anything like this. The Super Stallion came down through a curtain of tracer fire, rounds streaking past its fuselage from 3 directions, and the pilot did not waver. The aircraft danced between the bullets like it was alive, like it knew where each round was going to be, and simply chose to be somewhere else. Torres watched the rotors clear a burned-out MRAP by what looked like inches, watched the tail boom swing past a rock outcropping that should have sheared it clean off, and then the wheels touched down in a space half the size of any landing zone he had ever seen marked in a tactical manual. The side doors slid open before the aircraft fully settled. Door gunners opened up immediately. M240s hammering at muzzle flashes on the ridgeline, tracers reaching out into the darkness to kill anything that moved. A crew chief appeared in the doorway, waving frantically, screaming words that Torres could not hear over the rotor wash and gunfire. He turned to the Marines around him, and his voice became the voice of every sergeant major who had ever lived. Critical wounded first. Stretcher bearers move now. Walking wounded follow. Everyone else provides covering fire until I tell you to board. Move. The Marines moved. Corpsmen sprinted toward the aircraft with stretchers bearing the 8 most critical cases. Men who had been dying slowly all night and now had a chance to die somewhere with surgeons and blood supplies. Torres directed traffic like a conductor leading an orchestra through hell, pointing stretcher teams toward the doors, shoving walking wounded into line, screaming at riflemen to keep shooting at anything that was not American. Inside the cockpit, Maya fought to keep the aircraft stable, while Park managed the threat board and the door gunners expended ammunition at a rate that would empty their stores in minutes. The Super Stallion shuddered as rounds punched through the fuselage somewhere behind her seat. She heard Park calling damage reports. Hydraulic line hit, secondary system. Losing fluid but within tolerance. Fuel cell intact. Engines nominal. They could still fly. The enemy had figured out what was happening. Fire that had been distributed across the marine perimeter now concentrated on the helicopter. Every fighter on the ridgelines understanding that killing this aircraft would seal the fate of everyone in the valley. Tracers converged on Maya's position from multiple angles. An RPG streaked past the cockpit close enough to illuminate Park's face through the windscreen. The door gunners kept firing. Torres reached the crew chief at the side door. "How many can you take?" The crew chief shouted over the chaos. 55 max. We are already over combat weight, just being here. Torres did the math instantly. 55 out of 451 survivors. One trip would save 10% of the battalion. 9 more trips to get everyone else. 9 more times this pilot would have to thread through the fire and land in this impossible space and pray that a Stinger did not find her on the approach. He started to ask how many trips they could make before dawn, but the pilot's voice cut through on the radio frequency. "Load them, Sergeant Major. I'm coming back." 55 Marines piled into the aircraft. 8 stretchers secured to the deck. Walking wounded crammed into every available space, sitting on laps, holding onto straps, pressing against each other like sardines in a can that happened to be taking fire from multiple directions. The crew chief counted heads and slapped the bulkhead twice. Maya pulled collective before the signal finished echoing. The Super Stallion groaned under the weight, engines screaming at the edge of their tolerance, but the aircraft rose. She felt the wheels leave the ground and immediately banked hard left, dropping the nose to build airspeed, desperate to clear the kill zone before something found her. The RPG detonated exactly where she had been sitting 3 seconds earlier. The blast wave rocked the aircraft, shrapnel pinging off the tail boom, but Maya was already climbing toward the canyon entrance that would take her back to FOB Falcon. Behind her, 55 Marines were still breathing. In front of her, 396 more waited in the darkness. She keyed the radio to the ground frequency. "Bastard 6, Valkyrie is outbound with your critical wounded. I will be back in 22 minutes. Hold your perimeter." Blackwood's voice came back, stronger than it had been all night. "Valkyrie, Bastard 6 copies. We'll be here." Maya pushed the throttles forward and did the math that would define the rest of the night. 22 minutes each way, plus loading time. For trips before dawn, if everything went perfectly. For trips meant 220 Marines extracted. That left 176 still in the valley when daylight made the canyon approach suicidal. The math did not work. The math had never worked. Maya had not come this far to let mathematics decide who lived and who died. She found the canyon mouth and dove back into the darkness, already planning her second approach, already calculating how to shave minutes off the turnaround, already refusing to accept that some of those Marines would have to be left behind. Park looked over at her, face green in the glow of the instrument panels. "Engine temps are high, but holding. Hydraulics stabilized. We can do this." Maya nodded without taking her eyes off the terrain rushing past. "We do not have a choice." Behind them, in the cargo bay, a young lance corporal with shrapnel wounds in both legs looked out the window at the valley falling away beneath them. He did not know the pilot's name. He did not know that she had stolen this aircraft, defied direct orders, and flown through a missile corridor that should have been impossible. He only knew that someone had come when everyone said no one would. He closed his eyes and let himself believe he might actually survive. Colonel Richard Vance stood before the tactical display in the command center, watching a ghost return from the dead. Captain Chin's transponder had reappeared on the screen 12 minutes ago, climbing out of the Karengal Valley with 55 Marine transponder codes clustered around her position. She had done the impossible. She had flown through a missile corridor, landed in a kill zone, extracted wounded under fire, and now she was bringing them home. Vance should have felt relief. Instead, he felt the cold certainty of a man watching his career unravel in real time. His operations officer approached with a tablet showing the medical team's preparations. "Sir, casualty receiving is standing by. 8 critical wounded inbound. Chen's ETA is 6 minutes." Vance nodded without looking at the tablet. "Have security meet that aircraft when it lands. Captain Chen is to be placed under arrest immediately. Confiscate her flight gear and secure the helicopter." The operations officer hesitated. "Sir, with respect, she just extracted 55 Marines from a situation we declared impossible. The wounded need immediate treatment. If we delay the aircraft on the pad for an arrest." Chun violated direct orders. She stole a military aircraft. She endangered a $30 million asset against explicit instructions from her commanding officer. Vance turned to face his subordinate. "I do not care if she pulled the president himself out of that valley. She is under arrest the moment her wheels touch the ground." The officer swallowed whatever he had been about to say. "Yes, sir." He paused at the door. "Sir, based on her fuel state and the tactical situation, she is going to try to go back. The wounded will not stop her. She will just refuel and launch again." Vance had already considered this. "Then ground every helicopter on this base. No aircraft launches without my direct personal authorization. If Chun wants to save those Marines, she could do it on foot." The operations officer left to execute orders that would strand 396 Marines in a valley full of enemies because one colonel could not tolerate being disobeyed. 300 miles away, in a climate-controlled operations center that hummed with the quiet efficiency of institutional power, Major General Patricia Reeves was watching the same tactical display with very different eyes. Reeves had commanded combat operations for 15 years. She had sent men and women to die and lived with those decisions every day since. She understood the calculus of acceptable losses, understood why Vance had made the call he made, and she had been prepared to accept the consequences of that call when the sun rose on a valley full of dead Marines. Then Captain Maya Chun had stolen a helicopter and changed the equation. Her aide appeared at her elbow. "Ma'am, Colonel Vance at FOB Falcon is requesting guidance. He has placed the extraction pilot under arrest and grounded all remaining aircraft. He wants confirmation of his authority to court-martial her." Reeves did not respond immediately. She pulled up Chen's flight data on her personal terminal, watching the replay of the approach vector. The pilot had threaded through terrain that should have been impassable, found a gap in the missile coverage that 3 separate intelligence teams had missed, and executed a landing under fire that violated every safety margin in the operational handbook. She had also saved 55 lives in the process, with more to follow if Vance would get out of her way. "Give me Colonel Vance," Reeves said. "Direct line." The connection took 30 seconds. Vance's voice came through with the defensive tone of a man who knew he was about to be questioned. "General Reeves, thank you for calling. I wanted to ensure you were aware of the situation. Captain Chun violated direct orders and Colonel Vance." Reeves cut him off with 2 words. Her voice carried the weight of stars and decades of command authority. "You will not arrest Captain Chun. You will not ground your remaining aircraft. You will provide that pilot with whatever support she requires to continue extraction operations. Am I clear?" "Ma'am, with respect, she directly disobeyed my orders. She risked a critical aviation asset against explicit. She is saving 540 Marines, Colonel." Reeves let the words hang in the air. "Marines that you had written off as acceptable losses. Marines whose families will know that someone at FOB Falcon decided they were not worth the risk. Is that the story you want told at the inquiry, Colonel? That you tried to arrest the one pilot who had the courage to do what you would not?" Silence on the line. Reeves could hear Vance breathing, could imagine the calculations running through his mind as he weighed his career against his pride. "General, the Stinger threat is real. If Chun goes back and gets shot down, we lose the aircraft and the crew and possibly the Marines she's trying to extract. The risk assessment. Your risk assessment was wrong, Colonel. Chun proved that when she flew through your impossible corridor and landed in your impossible kill zone." Reeves leaned forward. "Now you have a choice. You can support that pilot and share in whatever success she achieves, or you can obstruct her and own every death that results. Choose carefully. The line went silent for a long moment. Then Vance's voice returned, smaller than before. Understood, General. I will provide full support for continued extraction operations. See that you do. And Colonel, I will be watching. Reeves ended the call and turned back to the tactical display. Chen's aircraft was on final approach to FOB Falcon, 55 Marines about to receive the medical care that would save their lives. In a few minutes, she would refuel and launch again, flying back into the darkness to pull more survivors from the valley. The general watched the blinking icon descend toward the runway and allowed herself a moment of something that felt like hope. The math still did not work. There were too many Marines and too little time. But Maya Chun had already proven that math was not the only thing that mattered. Sometimes courage could bend the numbers. Trip 2 began 6 minutes after Maya's wheels touched the tarmac at FOB Falcon. Medical teams swarmed the aircraft before the rotors stopped spinning, stretchers rushing toward the hospital while fuel trucks rushed toward the helicopter. Maya stayed in the cockpit, running system checks, watching gauges, refusing to let herself feel anything that might slow her down. Park appeared at her window with 2 bottles of water and a protein bar. Maya drank 1 bottle in a single continuous swallow and was airborne before she finished the second. The enemy had adjusted. Fire that had been scattered during her first approach now concentrated along her inbound vector, tracers reaching up from positions that had been silent before. Maya banked hard south, adding 3 minutes to her flight time, but avoiding the kill zone that waited along her original route. She came in low over the western ridge, dropping into the valley from an angle the enemy had not anticipated, and touched down while fighters scrambled to reposition their weapons. 50 more Marines climbed aboard in 4 minutes. Blackwood had organized the loading procedures during Maya's absence, creating a human chain that moved wounded and able-bodied alike with brutal efficiency. Torres held the perimeter with whatever Marines could still fight, pouring fire into enemy positions that crept closer with each passing hour. Trip 3. Harrington's Apaches had been on station for 9 hours, cycling back to FOB for ammunition and fuel in rotating pairs, but the supplies were running low and the pilots were exhausted. Harrington's voice crackled over the radio as Maya began her third approach. Chun, you are certifiably insane. A pause filled with static and gunfire. Also, that is still the best flying I have ever seen. Do not make me regret saying that by getting yourself killed. Maya allowed herself 3 seconds of something that might have been gratitude. Just keep them off me, Rooster. I have Marines to move. The third extraction pulled 55 more from the valley. 160 survivors at FOB Falcon, wounds being treated, lives being saved. 291 still waiting in the darkness. Trip 4. Dawn was coming. Maya could see the first gray hints of light bleeding into the eastern horizon, could feel the clock running out on her night vision advantage. Her eyes burned from 12 hours without sleep. Her hands trembled slightly on the controls, and her mind kept trying to drift toward calculations she refused to complete. How many more trips? How many more Marines? How many would she have to leave behind? Park took primary controls for the approach, her hands steadier than Maya's for the first time all night. Maya shifted to the weapons systems, managing door gunners and threat receivers while her co-pilot threaded through the canyon with the same precision Maya had shown hours earlier. They had flown together long enough to share instincts, to anticipate each other's movements, to function as a single organism spread across 2 seats. The valley was worse than before. Enemy reinforcements had arrived during the night, fresh fighters replacing the casualties Harrington's Apaches had inflicted. Fire poured down from every ridgeline, tracers so thick they looked like solid walls of light. Blackwood's voice cut through the chaos on the radio. Valkyrie, Bastard 6, abort approach, repeat abort. LZ is compromised. They have zeroed our position. You cannot land here. Maya took the controls back from Park. Negative, Bastard 6. Light it up. I'm coming in. Harrington heard the transmission. His flight had maybe 2 minutes of ammunition remaining, enough for one more gun run before they became expensive spectators. He made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. Flight, this is lead. Expend all remaining ordnance on enemy positions east and north of ELZ. Danger close, authorization granted. Give Chunner corridor. The Apaches dove toward the ridgelines with their cannons blazing, rockets streaking into enemy positions, explosions walking across the high ground in a display of violence that bought Maya exactly the window she needed. She dropped through the suppressed fire and touched down in the same impossible space she had used 3 times before. This load was different. Blackwood climbed aboard with her command staff, the officers who had held the battalion together through 8 hours of hell. Torres stayed on the ground, organizing the remaining Marines, refusing to leave while any of his people remained in the valley. Maya watched him through the cockpit window as she pulled pitch, watched him raise one hand in a gesture that might have been salute or farewell or prayer. 275 Marines extracted. The sun breached the horizon as Maya cleared the valley rim, painting the mountains gold and red, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Daylight changed everything. The canyon approach that had saved her 4 times would become a death trap in full visibility, every turn and twist visible to enemy spotters who would call and fire on her position. She keyed the radio to the ground frequency. Sergeant Major Torres, this is Valkyrie. I'm coming back. One more trip. Hold your position. Torres's voice came back steady as it had been all night. Copy, Valkyrie. We will be here. His pause lasted 2 heartbeats. Just do not be late. Maya pushed the throttles forward and pointed her battered helicopter toward FOB Falcon. Behind her, 265 Marines watched the sun rise and wondered if they would see it set. Daylight changed everything. Maya stood on the tarmac at FOB Falcon, watching fuel pour into her battered helicopter while the sun climbed higher and her window of survival shrank with every passing minute. The canyon approach that had saved her 4 times relied on darkness and terrain masking. In full daylight, enemy spotters would see her coming from kilometers away. Every turn would be anticipated. Every landing zone would be pre-registered for mortar fire. Flying back into that valley now was not courage. It was suicide. The operations officer intercepted her before she reached the cockpit. Captain Chun, I cannot let you launch. Colonel Vance has authorized continued extraction operations, but daylight approach through the canyon corridor is assessed as non-survivable. You need to wait for the fast movers to suppress enemy positions. Maya looked at him with eyes that had not slept in 18 hours. Those Marines held their position all night because I told them I was coming back. She pushed past him and climbed into her seat. If you want to stop me, you'll have to shoot me down. Park was already in the right seat, running pre-flight checks on systems that had been pushed far beyond their design limits. Hydraulic pressure was low. Engine temperatures ran hot, even at idle. The airframe had taken so many rounds that the crew chief had stopped counting holes. The Super Stallion should have been grounded for maintenance 12 hours ago. It was about to fly the most dangerous mission of its operational life. Maya lifted off and turned toward the mountains. The radio crackled with traffic she had not expected. Fast movers on station. Call sign Hammer Flight for F-18S loaded for ground attack. The fixed-wing support that Vance had promised 18 hours ago had finally arrived, too late to matter and just in time to complicate everything. The Hornets made their runs while Maya crossed the foothills. Explosions walked across the ridgelines where enemy positions had tormented the Marines all night. But the bombing did something Maya had not anticipated. The strikes cratered her approach routes, filled the canyons with debris and smoke, transformed the terrain she had memorized into an unrecognizable moonscape. Park sought first. Primary route is gone. Secondary is blocked with rockfall. I cannot find a clear path. Maya scanned the terrain below, searching for anything that might work. The enemy would be disorganized from the airstrikes, their positions disrupted, but that advantage would evaporate in minutes. She needed a new approach, and she needed it now. There, Park pointed toward a dark line cutting through the valley floor. Dry riverbed. It runs through their positions, but below their firing solutions. The walls would give us cover from direct fire. Maya studied the river canyon. It was insane. The passage was maybe 60 feet wide at its narrowest points. Her rotor diameter was 72 feet. The math said it was impossible. She banked toward the river mouth. Math had been wrong all night. The Super Stallion entered the canyon at 100 knots, rotor tips nearly scraping the walls on either side. Maya tilted the aircraft, flying with the rotor disc angled, one side dipping low while the other climbed high. It was a technique she had practiced in simulators and been told never to attempt in real flight conditions. The helicopter screamed through the narrow passage like a knife through flesh, stone walls blurring past in her peripheral vision. Park stopped breathing. The door gunner stopped shooting. Everyone aboard understood that a single gust of wind, a single miscalculation, would turn them into a debris field scattered across a quarter-mile of Afghan riverbed. The canyon twisted left, and Maya followed it, feeling the aircraft shudder as rotor wash bounced off the walls in chaotic patterns. A rock outcropping appeared directly ahead, too close to avoid, and she threaded between it and the opposite wall with clearance measured in inches. Then the passage widened and the valley opened before her. Torres was standing in the open, exposed to sniper fire, holding a smoke grenade over his head to mark the landing zone. Purple smoke billowed around him as Maya descended through the last of the enemy fire, touched down, and threw open the doors. 265 Marines. Her aircraft could carry 55. Torres reached the cockpit window, shouting over the rotor wash. "We're not all fitting, Captain." Maya looked at the Marines streaming toward her aircraft, looked at the sun climbing higher, looked at the canyon that would be impossible to fly twice in daylight. She had maybe 10 minutes before enemy forces repositioned and cut off her escape route. "We take as many as we can. Walking wounded on the skids. Serious wounded inside. Pack them in." Torres turned and started shouting orders. Marines climbed onto every available surface, clinging to external hardpoints, sitting on the deck with legs dangling out the doors, pressing against each other in spaces that had never been designed to hold human bodies. The aircraft groaned under the weight. Engine temperatures climbed into the red. Warning lights flickered across the instrument panel. The crew chief appeared at Maya's shoulder. "Captain, we have 89 aboard. We are way over max gross weight. The engines are redlining." Maya watched the gauges climb toward numbers that meant catastrophic failure. She watched Marines still running toward her aircraft. She watched Torres pushing the last of the seriously wounded through the side door. "That is enough. We lift now, or we do not lift at all." She pulled collective and felt the Super Stallion fight against gravity, against physics, against every limitation built into its design. The engine screamed. The airframe shuddered. For one terrible moment, the wheels refused to leave the ground. Then they were airborne, climbing through fire and smoke, 89 Marines clinging to an aircraft that should not have been able to carry them. Maya pointed the nose toward the canyon and began the most dangerous flight of her life. Behind her, 176 Marines watched her go and waited for her to come back. Maya cleared the canyon with 89 Marines aboard an aircraft that physics said should not fly. The Super Stallion screamed its protest through every rivet and weld, engines running so hot that warning lights had stopped blinking and simply glowed solid red. She nursed the throttles like a surgeon managing a dying patient, trading altitude for airspeed, trading safety margins for survival margins, refusing to let the machine quit until it delivered its cargo home. The landing at FOB Falcon was more controlled crash than touchdown. Mechanics swarmed the aircraft before the rotors stopped spinning, pulling panels, checking systems, shouting assessments that grew more alarmed with each passing second. The lead mechanic reached Maya's window with grease on his hands and fear in his eyes. "Captain, this bird should not be flying. Hydraulic system is compromised. Engine 2 is showing metal in the oil, and we have structural damage to the tail boom. You put this thing back in the air, it might not come down in one piece." Maya looked at him through eyes that had stopped registering exhaustion. 176 Marines are waiting for me in that valley. She started the engine restart sequence. If you want to ground this aircraft, put it in writing and sign your name. The mechanic stepped back. 6 minutes later, Maya was airborne. The final approach was everything the previous runs had not been. The enemy had figured out her river canyon route. Fighters lined the walls now, pouring fire down into the passage from positions she could not avoid. Rounds punched through the cockpit windscreen, shattering glass across the instrument panel. Park jerked in her seat as a bullet found her shoulder, blood spreading across her flight suit in a dark bloom. Maya shouted over the gunfire. "How bad?" Park's voice came through gritted teeth. "Hurts like hell." Still flying. Her hands never left the controls, compensating for Maya's evasive maneuvers, keeping the aircraft stable while the world exploded around them. They emerged from the canyon into the valley for the 6th time. Torres had the last 176 Marines staged and ready, organized into loading groups that would minimize time on the ground. He stood in the open again, smoke grenade raised, refusing to take cover while his people needed a beacon. Maya touched down, and the Marines surged forward. They loaded in under 4 minutes, bodies filling every space, hands gripping every surface, 176 lives crammed into an aircraft designed to carry a third of that number. Torres was the last aboard, pulling the crew chief in after him, slapping the bulkhead twice to signal ready. The liftoff was the hardest yet. Maya felt the wheels strain against the earth, felt the engines howl at the edge of failure, felt the entire aircraft shudder with the effort of defying gravity one final time. Then they were rising, climbing through fire that seemed to come from everywhere at once, clawing for altitude with 176 souls, depending on engines that had nothing left to give. They cleared the valley rim. They found the canyon mouth. They were going to make it. The engine fire warning screamed to life halfway through the passage. Park's voice cut through the alarm. "We are burning." Maya could see flames reflected in the canyon walls, could smell smoke seeping in the cockpit, could feel the aircraft beginning to lose the power it needed to stay airborne. She pushed the throttles past their stops, demanding everything the dying engines had left. "We are also flying. Hold together. Just hold together." The canyon ended. FOB Falcon appeared in the distance, runway lights blinking like a promise. 2 kilometers. 1. Engine 2 failed completely at 200 meters, the Super Stallion lurching as half its power disappeared in a cascade of warning lights and mechanical screams. Maya entered autorotation, the emergency descent technique that traded altitude for rotor speed, the last option available when engines could no longer provide power. The ground rushed up at them. She flared at the last possible moment, felt the wheels slam into concrete hard enough to compress the landing gear struts to their stops, felt the aircraft bounce and settle, and finally, impossibly, come to rest upright on the tarmac. Smoke poured from engine 2. Marines tumbled out of every door and hatch, some running, some crawling, all of them alive. Medical teams and fire crews converged on the wreckage that had been her helicopter. Park slumped in her seat, blood loss pulling her toward unconsciousness. Maya reached over and squeezed her hand. "We made it." Park managed something that might have been a smile. "You are insane." Maya squeezed harder. "And you flew with me anyway." The final count came through 6 hours later. 540 Marines had entered the Karangal Valley. 89 had died before extraction began. 451 had been pulled from that valley by Captain Maya Chun across 6 trips in 14 hours of continuous flight operations. 0 extraction casualties. Every Marine who boarded her aircraft made it home alive. 3 weeks later, Maya stood in dress blues before a board of inquiry at the Pentagon. The charges were read aloud by a JAG officer who could not meet her eyes. Violation of direct orders, theft of military aircraft, reckless endangerment of personnel and equipment, conduct unbecoming an officer. Major General Patricia Reeves took the stand as the final witness. She spoke for 11 minutes about tactical innovation, about leadership under fire, about the difference between following orders and doing what was right. She described Maya's approach vectors, her improvised solutions, her refusal to abandon Marines that her chain of command had written off as acceptable losses. Captain Chun demonstrated extraordinary judgment under impossible conditions, Reeves concluded. She identified a tactical solution that 3 intelligence teams had missed. She executed 6 combat extractions in an aircraft that should have been grounded after the second, and she saved 451 American lives in the process. The charges against her should be dismissed, and she should be decorated for valor above and beyond the call of duty. The board deliberated for 47 minutes. The charges were dismissed. Maya was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross and returned to flight status with a letter of commendation in her permanent file. The ceremony was quiet, held at her new duty station with only the pilots and crew who had served with her in attendance. General Reeves pinned the medal to her chest and said words that Maya barely heard over the sound of her own heartbeat. Afterward, she walked across the flight line toward the helicopter that would be hers to fly. The Super Stallion gleamed in the afternoon sun, fresh from the factory, not a scratch or bullet hole to be found. Behind her, footsteps approached on the concrete. Chun. She turned. Captain James Harrington stood 10 feet away, flight suit unzipped, helmet under his arm. The same pilot who had mocked her cautious flying, who had joked about taxi runs and letting real pilots handle combat. He looked different now. Something in his eyes had changed. He raised his hand in a crisp salute. Maya returned it, holding the gesture for a long moment before either of them moved. Harrington dropped his hand first. That drink I promised you. Tonight, Officers Club, 1900. He paused. I am buying. Maya allowed herself a small smile. I will be there. She turned and walked toward her aircraft, the sun warm on her face, the weight of the metal against her chest, the sound of rotors spinning up somewhere across the base. Behind her, 451 Marines were alive because she had refused to accept that some equations could not be solved. If you have ever had to break the rules to do what was right, drop a comment and tell us about it. And if this story moved you, let us know which branch you would serve in. Sometimes the best decisions are the ones no one else has the courage to make. She climbed into the cockpit and began her pre-flight checks. The war was not over. There would be more valleys, more Marines, more impossible choices. But today the sky was clear and the mission was waiting, and Captain Maya Chun was exactly where she belonged.